Imagine a place where nightfall brings not silence, but an eerie presence. Deep in the heart of Zarzal, a small, secluded Colombian village steeped in mystery, locals have long whispered of towering, obsidian figures emerging from the darkness. These aren't merely shadows or tricks of the light. They are mysterious humanoids, reported fleetingly by many, with accounts that converge and compel us to question whether they truly exist. In today's video, we delve into 7 detailed eyewitness accounts that describe encounters with creatures that defy the laws of physics. From inexplicable messages carried on the wind to experiences that challenge our understanding of nature, each testimony adds a piece to a puzzle that has haunted this region for decades. Are these entities ancient guardians, omens of a hidden force, or something even more enigmatic? Prepare to journey into the depths of Colombia's rural heartland and discover the secrets that the night holds. I'm the File Keeper, and welcome to my archive. Something strange loomed over El Guimaral. Since early December 2012, the villagers began noticing that as night fell, the animals in the village grew restless. Dogs barked endlessly for hours, their behavior unlike anything we had ever seen. Horses reared up for no reason, and sheep huddled in the corners of their pens as if trying to escape an invisible predator. It was as if they sensed something we humans could not. My brother, Luis Pereira, a 50-year-old skeptic, had always dismissed such things, but even he couldn't ignore what was happening. For several nights, he saw his dogs staring into the darkness, growling, as if something was there, yet nothing ever was. On December 27th, he finally decided he needed help to figure out what was going on. That's when he called me. That night, I went to his house. As soon as I arrived, I noticed the dogs were more agitated than ever, but what truly froze my blood was realizing they weren't barking outward, as they usually did when sensing a stranger. They were barking toward the house. Something was wrong. I rushed inside and called for my brother, but he didn't respond. Then I saw him, standing motionless by the window. His body was rigid, arms limp at his sides, breathing slow and shallow. He seemed hypnotized. I followed his gaze. Outside the window, a figure stood in the darkness. It was humanoid, but not human. It must have been over 2 meters tall, with skin black and glossy, as if covered in a metallic or oily substance. Its muscles were visible, as if its skin was semi-translucent. But the most terrifying part was the red lights pulsating in its abdomen, glowing rhythmically, as if alive. A chill ran down my spine. My brother remained frozen, as if not truly there. Without thinking, I shouted his name. In that instant, the creature noticed me. Its eyes, or what I assumed were its eyes, shifted in my direction. My voice also snapped Luis out of his trance. He staggered back, gasping for breath. But I had no time to help him, because the creature moved. And when I say moved, I don't mean it ran. I mean it vanished from one spot and reappeared meters ahead, as if projected by the wind itself. Its movements were rapid, inhuman. It leaped, covering an absurd distance in mere seconds. I bolted out of the house, trying to chase after it, but it was useless. I only caught a glimpse of its silhouette disappearing into the neighboring field. The dogs there erupted into frantic barking, signaling that the creature had reached their area. And then, silence. The next morning, we searched the area, but found no footprints, no tracks, nothing, as if nothing had ever happened. But I know what I saw. Something was among us, and the animals had sensed it long before we did. It was a hot afternoon in El Guimaral, and as usual, I was working at the sugarcane mill with some of the workers. Everything seemed normal until something caught my eye. Moving through the nearby bushes, I saw a strange figure. It was tall, far taller than any man I had ever seen. with a strong, muscular body, yet its skin was black and glossy, as if coated in oil or some kind of metallic substance. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. But then it moved. It didn't walk like a normal person. Its movements were strangely fluid, too fast, too smooth. I wanted a better look, so I started following it. But in seconds, it had vanished among the trees. I tried to ignore what I had just seen. I returned to work, but something deep inside me knew that wasn't normal. About 10 minutes later, I heard strange noises around the house. They weren't the rustling of leaves in the wind or the sounds of nocturnal animals wandering. No, this was something heavier, deliberate, as if someone or something was circling us. That's when the fear set in. I thought maybe it was a criminal lurking around the property, perhaps a group of thieves waiting for the right moment to strike. My sister, Nellie Varela, was in the backyard, hanging laundry, when I approached her. My voice came out tense. "There's someone strange lurking around." She looked at me, confused. But before she could ask anything, I told her to speak to the landowner and borrow a shotgun. If someone was out there, I needed to protect myself. With the gun in hand, I walked toward the source of the noises. My heart pounded in my chest. I was sure I was about to find some thief hiding in the dark. But when I aimed and pulled the trigger to scare off the intruder, what I saw made my blood run cold. The creature stepped out of the shadows. It was the same being I had seen earlier, but closer now. And there was no doubt in my mind. This was not human. When it started running, I realized its speed was unnatural. Its movements weren't like a person fleeing. They were like those of a predator, calculated and terrifyingly precise. And then it jumped. An impossible jump. It covered an insane distance in a single motion, as if gravity did not affect it the same way it does us. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, but then the sugarcane mill workers started shouting. They saw it too. The creature stopped, turned to look at us, and then, in another instant, it lunged again. With each leap, the ground trembled beneath our feet. Fear took hold of everyone. Some ran inside, others stood paralyzed, just watching that impossible thing move. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the forest. We stood there, in absolute silence, struggling to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Later, we learned that the Pereira brothers had seen something similar days earlier. And when we compared descriptions, there was no doubt. The being was over 2 meters tall, with long legs and a completely black glossy body, like liquid petroleum. It had no hair, and some of us even saw red glowing eyes. But the strangest part was the light on its abdomen. Some said it looked like small orbs, others swore it was a slowly spinning spiral. That night, no one at the sugarcane mill slept. When the first reports about the creatures began to circulate, my colleague Stephen Danilo and I knew there was something to uncover. As journalists, we had investigated numerous strange stories before, but this one was different. The locals spoke with fear, as if this was more than just rumors or mass hysteria. After conducting several interviews, we discovered that there was a specific area in the forest where these sightings were more frequent. If there was any truth to these stories, that was where we needed to be. To ensure we wouldn't get lost or take unnecessary risks, Guillermo Osorio, an old resident and a deep connoisseur of the region, offered to guide us. We accepted without hesitation. If something was waiting for us in that forest, it was better to have someone experienced by our side. As night fell, we set up camp and lit a fire. The warmth of the flames seemed to shield us from the dense darkness around us, but still, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. The silence was too deep, amplifying the tension of the moment. It was around 2 in the morning when it all began. First came the noises, small branches snapping, light footsteps on the vegetation. At first, we tried to convince ourselves that it was just nocturnal animals. But then, something changed. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it between the trees. And that's when we saw it. There, standing in the darkness, was the being so many locals had described. Tall, imposing, with black, glossy skin that looked like it was made of an oily material. Red lights pulsed from its abdomen, forming patterns that seemed alive. It moved, not walking like a man, but gliding across the ground too fast. Its fluid movements contrasted with its height and muscular build. It seemed to be a heavy creature, yet it moved as if it were light. Stephen didn't hesitate and started chasing it. We ran after that thing, trying to film it, but it moved at an impossible speed. Then, out of nowhere, another creature emerged. It ran alongside the first, both circling around, weaving intricate patterns. In an instant, they were beside us. The next moment, they had shifted, now perched atop the nearby hills, as if they had teleported. Stephen then noticed something. The red lights pulsing on their bodies seemed to follow a pattern. "This is a code," he murmured, breathless. Without hesitation, he climbed a tree to get a better view and began signaling with his flashlight. That's when it happened. The creatures responded. With every flash of Stephen's light, the lights on their abdomens flashed back. It wasn't random. They were understanding us. We started recording frantically, trying to capture that moment, trying to decipher what it all meant. But before we could get more answers, we heard something in the distance. Horses. A group of armed locals on horseback was approaching quickly. Maybe they had heard our voices, or maybe they were already patrolling the area. The creatures sensed it before we did. In an instant, they stopped. The lights flickered one last time, and then they vanished into the darkness. We stood there in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Though we hadn't managed to capture clear enough images to convince the skeptics, there was no doubt in our minds. Those creatures were real. And more than that, they were trying to communicate. I am Christian Ramos, an investigator with the Contacto OVNI Colombia group, and I have spent years searching for concrete evidence of extraterrestrial beings on Earth. In 2013, I traveled to El Guasimo, where reports of black, glossy humanoid creatures caught my attention. Diego Mondragon, a local farmer, offered his property as a base for my research, and it was there that I had one of the most impactful experiences of my life. It was late at night. The sky was clear, and the only illumination came from the stars. I was analyzing the terrain when I felt a strange presence, an overwhelming sensation of being watched, as if something very close was silently studying me. When I lifted my gaze, I saw a massive figure standing right in front of me. The creature was over 2 meters tall, its skin appearing to be made of a black, glossy material, like thick oil. There were no visible facial features, but even without apparent eyes, I could feel it staring at me. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to process the scene. My instinct was to document the moment, so I reached down to grab my camera. At that instant, the being retreated with an impossible leap, covering a massive distance in mere seconds. Its movement was fluid, fast, and inhuman. Before I could react, it had already vanished into the darkness. What I witnessed that night changed everything for me. It was not an illusion, not a shadow. It was something real. Since then, I have continued my investigation, but I know that some answers will never be fully revealed. What I do know is this: they are here, and they always have been. My name is Diego Mondragon. I am a farmer in the Guasimal region, and for many years, I heard stories about strange creatures appearing in the forest. When journalists came and confirmed that the reports were real, everything changed. The story made headlines, and suddenly, ufologists, and curious individuals began arriving from different parts of the country and even from abroad. I had my own brief sightings of these beings over the years. Nothing too clear, just silhouettes moving swiftly among the trees. But over time, I realized that my farm had become a gathering point for investigators studying the phenomenon. I hosted several people, including the ufologist Christian Ramos, who came face to face with one of the creatures. As time passed, I noticed a pattern in the sightings. There were periods of calm, but they always returned. Unlike most people, I no longer felt fear. On the contrary, I started believing that if they meant us harm, they would have done so already. That's why I always told the locals there was no reason to panic. I believed these beings were peaceful. On December 28th, 2018, I was at my brother's house on a farm neighboring mine. The night was pleasant, and everyone was chatting outside when I heard a strange sound coming from the forest. Footsteps, branches snapping. Something was circling the house. It didn't take long for the other guests to notice. Some grew uneasy, thinking it might be a thief lurking around. To ward off any potential threat, one of the guests grabbed a gun and fired a warning shot into the air, but that did not drive away whatever was out there. At that moment, I knew. I had heard these sounds before. I had felt this presence. I left my brother's house, approached the fence, and without fear, spoke into the shadows. Stay calm. We are at peace. And then they stepped out of the darkness. There were 5 of them, tall, completely black and glossy, with no hair, no clothing, just those imposing silhouettes reflecting the dim light of the night. But this time, I felt something different. They weren't just observing. They wanted to communicate, and somehow, I understood them. I can't explain how, but the words appeared in my mind as if they were being imprinted directly into my thoughts. They allowed me to record an audio, a message they said needed to be delivered to humanity. The voice of one of the beings was captured on the device I held. They said humanity needed to remain united because a catastrophic event was approaching. The end of our species might be near, not due to wars or natural disasters, but because of something spiritual. And they were here to ensure that at least part of the human race survived. Then, the being revealed something that left me speechless. Humans have too many intimate relationships among themselves, and this could harm life. They insisted that we must learn to transmute the energy of water. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but to them, this would be an essential skill for our survival in the future. Then they revealed something even more unbelievable. They said they had been here for at least 60 years. They came from the Orion constellation and lived in an underground complex more than 5,000 meters deep. And there, beneath the earth, they were guarding something. A mothership. It was supposedly hidden directly beneath the Zarzal region. And El Guaymaral, the place where so many sightings occurred, was not just a random point. It was an entry and exit to this underground location. But the most shocking revelation came at the end of the recording. They weren't only among us at night. They walked among humans during the day as well, but not in their original forms. They had the ability to transform into animals. As I spoke with the beings, the people at the gathering watched the scene in terror. Some could hardly believe what they were seeing. Others were paralyzed with fear. That was when one of the guests, overcome by panic, grabbed a phone and called the police. Working in law enforcement for 16 years, I thought I had seen it all. I believed nothing could surprise me anymore. But that night, something happened. Something I've never been able to forget. The call came over the radio late at night. Reports described strange figures wandering near a farm in the El Guaymaral region. At first, I assumed it was an intruder or a criminal. Nothing out of the ordinary. I drove to the location, alert to what I might find. The road was eerily silent, with only the interference on the radio breaking the hum of the engine. The dirt road seemed darker than usual that night. When I arrived, I immediately sensed this was no ordinary call. A group of locals stood gathered at the entrance of the property, visibly shaken. They spoke over each other, gesturing, pointing toward the forest. The fear on their faces was real. Then I saw Diego Mondragon, the farmer. He approached and led me to the backyard, where something waited in the darkness. As I stepped into the yard, a chill ran down my spine. The night was unnaturally dark, and the dim lights from the house failed to cut through the shadows surrounding the area. And then, I saw them. Tall, over 2 meters in height. Their forms were completely black and glossy, as if their bodies were made of an oily substance that absorbed the light. They had no faces, no human features aside from their humanoid shape. They were something different, something that shouldn't be there. My police instincts kicked in, and my hand moved toward my gun. But before I could even think of drawing it, they spoke. Their voices were unnatural. They didn't seem to come from a single point. The sound reverberated around me, shifting from in front to behind, to my sides, as if they were moving at an impossible speed. They were too fast. I tried calling the station on my radio, but all I got was static and distortion. It made no sense. It was as if some magnetic field surrounded these beings. Diego noticed my fear and reassured me, saying they were peaceful and had a message to share with us. Unable to report what was happening, I did the only thing I could. I pulled out my phone and started recording audio. Filming would have been pointless in the pitch darkness, but at least I could capture their voices. These entities had a purpose. They spoke of something grand, something yet to come. They claimed they were not only among us at night, but also during the day. They took other forms to walk unnoticed among humans, often as animals. They mentioned that they had been living underground for more than 60 years, and that Zarzal and Guaymaral were entry points to a hidden complex beneath the earth. They spoke about humanity, as if they had been observing us for a long time. There was a warning, an impending threat, but their message was cryptic. They spoke of a disaster, one not caused by war or natural catastrophe, but something spiritual. I should have been terrified. Anyone would have been. But something about that night, about their presence, made me simply listen. Before I even realized it, they were no longer there. There were no footsteps, no sound of movement. They had simply vanished. The radio crackled back to life. The silence of the night returned. The locals around me remained in shock. Some muttered prayers. Others stared blankly into the distance, trying to process what they had just witnessed. I walked back to my patrol car in silence. What could I possibly say? How could I explain this? The next day, I tried telling my colleagues what had happened. They laughed, mocked me, said I was probably tired, that I had let the local stories get to me. But I knew the truth. They were still there. I could feel it. I still do. I've lived in El Guasimo since birth, and since I was a child, I've heard stories about these creatures. At first, they were just whispers among the elders, spoken with hesitation, but everything changed when the case reached the national news. Farmer Diego Mondragon and Officer Manuel Velandia spoke publicly about their encounters with the beings, and soon, the story was all over the media. At first, some believed it, but soon came the mockery, the skepticism, and the ridicule. Anyone who spoke of the beings became a laughingstock. That's how the town chose silence. The sightings never stopped, but few dared to admit they had seen anything. Over time, only those who truly knew the truth continued to share what was happening. Those who didn't want to be labeled as crazy simply pretended nothing was happening. The truth is, we learned to live with them. At first, the fear was inevitable. But as the years passed, we realized they meant us no harm. On the contrary, they seemed to watch over us and sometimes even help us. The proof came when we faced a severe water shortage. To find drinkable water, we had to dig wells as deep as 30 meters. But these creatures showed us the right places, where water could be found just 7 meters below. That's when we understood. This wasn't just one group. There were many. They told us they were not from here, but they had been on Earth for a long time. That they had a mission to warn humanity about what we were doing to the planet. That if we continued destroying everything, we would soon reach a point of no return. They spoke of things few of us could fully comprehend, about energy, balance, and the fate of humanity. They said they watched us closely, but they never intervened directly. They only tried to show us the way. Even today, we still see them. We still hear their messages. But now, no one speaks of it anymore. If you saw, you know. If you didn't, maybe it's better that way. The accounts have been shared, and now I ask you, what do you think? Have you ever heard of beings like the ones described in this video? Or perhaps you've had an encounter of your own? Let me know in the comments. For those who want to dig deeper, I've left some sources in the description with more details on these events. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps keep the archive growing. For more content featuring documented accounts, click on the related video or check out the playlist. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next case.